Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're doing something a bit different. We're going to completely put aside tradition and strictly analyze the clinical, forensic, and historical reality of a first-century crucifixion. Whether you're coming at this topic from a historical, medical, or religious perspective, the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth is undeniably one of the most consequential events in human history. But today we are looking at it purely through the lens of cold, hard science. So, how did Jesus actually die? We're going to investigate exactly what happened physiologically to cause his death, and we're stripping away all those common misconceptions. We really want to understand how Roman engineering and human biology collided to produce what was literally considered the ultimate form of torture. Okay, let's open up this case file. We'll be using a massive, landmark 1986 paper from the Journal of the American Medical Association as our guide, combined with some incredibly compelling archaeological evidence. And what makes this analysis so robust is that it isn't just based on the gospel accounts. The medical researchers actually cross-reference the events with non-Christian ancient historians, people like the Roman writers Cornelius Tacitus and Pliny the Younger, as well as the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus. That historical alignment gives us a rock-solid foundation to apply modern medical science to this ancient execution. Here is our roadmap for the forensic breakdown. First, anatomy of an execution. Second, pre-crucifixion physical trauma. Third, the mechanics of the cross. Fourth, pathophysiology and asphyxiation. And finally, diagnosing the cause of death. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, Anatomy of an Execution, the historical context. We really need to establish the environment and timeline leading up to the execution itself. Think about the sheer physical toll this took before the execution even started. After his arrest, Jesus endured massive emotional stress, absolute sleeplessness, and a brutal 2.5-mile forced trek between various political and religious trials in the dead of night. His physical exhaustion was already heavily setting in. And based on the timeline, while exact years are still debated, astronomical and historical data heavily point to April in the year 30 AD, setting a very precise stage for what happens next. Which brings us to Section 2, Pre-Crucifixion Physical Trauma, the initial shock. Because before the cross was even brought into the picture, extreme trauma was already critically compromising his biological systems. You might have heard that the night before, while in the Garden of Gethsemane, historical texts record that Jesus sweat drops of blood. Well, medically speaking, this is a very real, albeit extremely rare, condition called hematidrosis. Jesus likely experienced a massive fight-or-flight response, which sent elevated catecholamines, like adrenaline, just surging through his bloodstream. This extreme stress actually caused the blood vessels in his sweat glands to rupture. The result? His skin was left intensely fragile, highly sensitive, and profoundly tender. Then comes the first major physical trauma, inflicted by the Roman flagrum. Now, this wasn't just a simple whipping. It was a scientifically designed tool meant to flay flesh. It was constructed of leather thongs braided with heavy iron balls and incredibly sharp pieces of sheep bone. The iron balls caused deep contusions, while the bones literally sliced into the skin and subcutaneous tissues. As the flogging went on, it would tear right into the underlying skeletal muscle. We're talking immense blood loss, basically turning the victim's back into ribbons of open flesh. The severe bleeding from that scourging, combined with over 12 hours of starvation, dehydration, and the physical assaults during his trials, it pushed Jesus into a highly dangerous pre-shock state. To put this in perspective, he was already losing a critical percentage of his body's entire blood volume before the execution had even begun. He was likely suffering from early hypovolemic shock. Clinically, this perfectly explains why he physically collapsed and simply couldn't carry his own cross the whole way to Golgotha. Let's move on to Section 3, the mechanics of the cross, engineering agony. Let's see exactly how Roman engineering perfected this absolutely gruesome punishment. Contrary to a lot of artistic depictions you might see where a victim is carrying a massive, full cross, that simply wasn't the historical reality. A full cross weighed over 300 pounds. Instead, Jesus likely carried only the 75 to 125-pound crossbar, which is known as the patibulum. Furthermore, he was likely crucified on a crux commissa. That's an uppercase T-shaped cross, where the vertical post was permanently fixed in the ground, standing roughly 6 to 8 feet high. This placed the victim right at eye level with his executioners. Another major misconception is where exactly the nails were placed. We almost always picture nails driven through the palms of the hands, right? Well, medical physics and actual first-century ossuary evidence confirm that the flesh of the palms would just tear straight out under the weight of a human body. So the reality is that 5 to 7-inch square-shafted iron spikes were driven through the wrists, specifically right between the carpal bones. Driven there, the nail could totally support the body's weight without tearing, but it completely crushed the median nerve. If you've ever hit your funny bone, you know that intense shooting pain? Imagine that amplified 1,000 times. That's what crushing the median nerve would feel like. It would send excruciating, paralyzing bolts of fiery pain shooting up the arms, and it would force the hands into a paralyzed, claw-like grasp. Next, the feet were nailed directly to the upright post. The spike was likely driven through the first or second intermetatarsal space. This action would instantly sever the deep peroneal and plantar nerves. This entire setup was intentionally engineered to inflict the maximum amount of neurological agony possible, while perfectly supporting the body's weight so the victim wouldn't just fall off. All right, Section 4, Pathophysiology and Asphyxiation, the agony of breathing. Now we have to examine the biomechanical horror of simply trying to take a breath while suspended. Hanging outward with arms outstretched like that pulled the body's weight aggressively down on the shoulders and chest. What this did was lock the intercostal muscles of the ribs into a constant state of inhalation. This means breathing in was easy, but passively breathing out, mechanically impossible. To just let a breath out, the victim actually had to actively fight gravity. They had to push up on their nailed feet, flex their elbows, and rotate their nailed wrists. Doing this caused unimaginable searing pain, and on top of that, pushing up meant violently scraping their completely lacerated back against the rough splinters of the wooden post. They had to repeat this torturous process for every single breath, which inevitably led to rapid muscle fatigue, severe cramps, and the very slow creep of asphyxiation. Which brings us to our final section. Part 5, Diagnosing the Cause of Death, the Clinical Conclusion. With all this multi-system trauma in mind, what was the actual physiological mechanism that finally killed him? Now, theories like a broken heart from extreme stress, medically known as Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, are popular, but they usually affect older women, making it highly unlikely for a healthy male in his 30s. And what about pure suffocation? Well, modern experiments by Dr. Frederick Sugibe with volunteers on crosses actually showed that subjects could maintain normal arterial oxygenation and hold a conversation. Since Jesus was recorded speaking on the cross, pure suffocation as the sole cause is actually pretty unlikely. Instead, medical forensics points strongly to traumatic hemorrhagic shock as the primary cause. From the massive blood loss of the scourging, the intense dehydration, and the sheer physical trauma, his circulating blood volume just absolutely plummeted. Once blood loss hits a critical threshold, your heart struggles to pump, your blood pressure ultimately drops to zero, and the body's cells are completely starved of oxygen. And this state of shock was violently accelerated by what trauma doctors refer to as the lethal triad. First, the immense tissue injury from the flogging. Second, hypothermia. Historical data shows early April in Jerusalem is cold. It can easily drop below freezing at night, and Jesus was hanging naked, completely exposed to the elements. Third is acidemia, meaning his blood became highly acidic from struggling to breathe. When these three things combine, they create a fatal feedback loop called coagulopathy. The body's blood clotting mechanisms totally fail, and you basically bleed out internally and externally. Because the impending Sabbath meant the bodies legally had to be removed, a Roman soldier ensured the execution was complete by thrusting an infantry spear straight into Jesus' side. The Gospel of John notes a sudden flow of blood and water. Medically, this perfectly describes the spear piercing the pleural cavity and the right side of the heart. The water was pleural and pericardial effusion. These are clear fluids that rapidly gather around the lungs and heart during severe trauma and shock, followed immediately by the dark blood of the right ventricle. Modern forensic pathology unequivocally aligns with the ancient historical accounts. The Roman executioners didn't just stumble into this method. It was a highly efficient, multi-system biological collapse that was carefully designed to cause the absolute maximum amount of pain before inducing traumatic shock. So, when we strip away the myth and the artistic traditions, and we look purely at the science of the cross, we are left with a staggering biological reality. Ancient writers accurately described incredibly complex medical conditions like hematidrosis and pleural effusion centuries before they even had the clinical vocabulary to fully understand them. It really leaves us with a fascinating question. When history and science align this perfectly, What other historical events are just waiting to be examined under the microscope? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I'll see you next time.